Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast. Today we have Robert Martinez. Hi, Robert. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much for the kind words and really excited about being here.
Today we're gonna talk about a very interesting topic, which I believe most educators are really focusing on right now, which is what AI is really changing in learning regarding students, themselves as educators, and the future of education. So today we're going to focus on that, and Robert is going to expand the topic as an AI specialist among other specialties that he's got under his sleeve. So Robert, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay. So hello, everyone. I'm Robert Martinez. This is my 32nd year in education. And I'm really excited because we know that education is such a hard job and very often underestimated and overlooked. I'm an English language teacher and teacher educator, and my three main areas of expertise that I'm passionate about are AI and technology in education, integrating it seamlessly, assessment, and then teacher education. And I have a YouTube channel where I create content every week for teachers who are struggling or not, a little bit of everything for everyone, because I really think I would like to help my peers become more aware of language assessment, teacher education, but especially now about AI in education, ethical and responsible use. I think that would encapsulate basically what I really want to share with my peers. And so you can find me on YouTube at Learning Together with Robert, and on Facebook and Instagram with the same handle, and also on LinkedIn. So don't forget to look me up, and then we can be connected. And I'm happy to help if I can.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I love about the material that you are developing and building online is that it is so useful. Every time that I watch any of your posts and that I see all the things that you are tackling, it is not only just useful, but so current and real. Most of the things that we, for example, encounter online sometimes are a little bit, let's say, artificial or not really doable in the classroom. One of the things that I love about your content is that is approachable, useful, and also very doable.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's get into it. So, Robert, what's actually changing in how students learn today when AI enters the process?
That's a really good question. I think that what's really changing is where the thinking happens, because students now can generate ideas instantly. And so the focus, I think, is changing from producing language to evaluating and refining it. And obviously, I'm saying this from the point of view of an English language teacher and teacher educator. And I think that is great, but at the same time is very risky, because if they skip the thinking, then it becomes a shortcut. And that opportunity is missed, the opportunity for learning, because they're not really involved in the production of those ideas. And we know that if we're not making the effort to connect the dots and we struggle, if there's no struggle, then we're not really learning. So I think there's an opportunity there for educators in general, and it is that we can push them towards better judgment. It's good, use it, but let's minimize the risk. So I think what's changing is where the thinking happens.
All right, so let's build our mind map from there, okay? So because I want today's podcast to feel a lot like this mind map process, we are going to be tackling many different aspects of all these central points that you are mentioning with this wonderful opening. So my follow-up question goes, where does this shift looks different depending on the learning environment in schools, academies, or independent learning? How do we see this change in these very specific environments?
That's a tricky question. In my experience, I think that the look really changes depending on the environment, because in more formal settings, AI is often used more cautiously or inconsistently. Outside the classroom, students are already using it. I'm students that are between 10 and 13 in one class, and then I have between 14 and 21 in other classes. And when I ask them, how are you using AI? What are you using it for? Is really scary in a sense to see how they're using it at different ages. And I'm sure we're going to get a chance to explore more the age of consent later. But it's really scary to see how they're using it and not always the best of ways. So I think that it changes quite a lot in those places or institutions where it is used more cautiously and there are rules or policies, and from those places where everyone can do whatever they want. So I think there's a big gap that we're seeing between guided and unguided use. I think for me, that's the most important division, shift that I can recognize there, guided and unguided use. And that's where teachers really matter, I think.
And we're getting more of the second, the unguided usage, especially
Absolutely.
not only unguided, but also not understanding what each of these tools that are out there in the market are for. But let's focus first on our students since we have opened that box, right? So when students start using artificial intelligence, what changes first? How do they think? How do they engage? Or how they complete those tasks that we try to be so creative in the classroom?
Okay. From my experience in the classroom, and I think that's, as you mentioned before, that my content is practical, is because I try to reflect as much as I can and use that opportunity, that privilege of being in a classroom to see how things happen. And I think that what changes first is task completion. And I can see a dichotomy here. It can go in two different ways. First of all, task completion, because they've realized that they can actually get answers very quickly, that they don't have to do the heavy lifting, that they can just copy and paste the question that they have in the homework, put it in an AI tool, and then get an answer. And I think that because we all were teenagers, and when we're teenagers, obviously our brain hasn't completely developed and want the shortcut. We want everything ready instantly so that we can then focus on the things that we like. So I think that the first thing that changes is task completion. They can do it straight away. I had a 16-year-old student telling me at B2 level, when I was asking them, how are you guys using AI? Are you using it at home? How do you use it? This student saying, oh yeah, I used it for my biology homework. I just copied and pasted, got the answer. I had a volleyball match. I didn't have time. I just copied and pasted it. I passed. I got a high mark. And I said, okay, maybe you shouldn't be bragging about that. But where is the learning? And said, well, I'll do it later when I have the time. It really helped me get out of a difficult situation, which in a sense, you can see positive things, adaptation, adaptability, resourcefulness, but at the same time is, oh, you can't. So I think that the positive side is that students produce better work faster, but that doesn't automatically mean learning, better learning, which it's linked to what we said before, that struggle and that hitting the wall of learning, which is missing.
And we understand as educators that there's no malice behind that resourcefulness that comes from this choice of I have my volleyball match and I just need to do and get this done, because then we as adults, we like sometimes make these choices as well. Things gotta be
Absolutely,
done.
yeah.
Like perpetuating this cycle of doing and not really understanding the process that is behind, because of course in adult world, when we're talking about work, the process is definitely different. It is understood that the learning had already happened at one point and we are just doing things based on our expertise. At least that's what's expected, right?
Yeah. And if I may add something very quickly, is my follow-up question was, and did your teacher say anything? And this student said, no, they didn't notice. So my personal thought is that they did notice, because we know our students. I know my students, and I know the quality of their work. I want to think that 99.9% of teachers know their students and care about their students. We're in this profession because of vocation, not because of the money we're making. And so I can tell immediately, whether something is, wait a minute, this language is beyond your level. So I imagine that this is something that maybe that teacher, they must have noticed it wasn't their work. So I wonder what's happening there. And this links to what we said before, teachers and students and where are we?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, as an educator, especially for that biology teacher that probably had noticed, but probably she had on her desk or on her computer or Google Classroom 10 other homework handouts in the same format, ways. And she's, you know what, next. I don't have time for these either
Totally.
because it is, as you have said, a total dichotomy of doing instead of taking a moment to understanding the teaching aspects and the learning aspects. But then I would like to say that in this case, it was a perfect opportunity for the educator to educate the student in what actually matters. Am I right?
That's right. Like a missed opportunity, right? And this links to, probably we'll talk about it as well, but the need to redefine assessment.
Absolutely. But it's not just only redefining assessment, because before getting there, we have to revisit our students' set of values and,
That's
ethical
right.
choices. Because when you were talking about, okay, we all have been teenagers, yes, but you and I belong to a time where being a teen was more similar to what our parents might have experienced and our
That's
grandparents.
right.
So why am I saying this? Because the reality that we have with our kids, it's very different because they belong to the digital reality and not as a transition reality as the one that we experience. And this actually does matter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
So, yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say absolutely, especially because nowadays they're in such a they're so different. I can think of 32 years in education, 9 different countries, and I can see students nowadays are so much more different from students 5 years ago. And this is because of the rapid development of AI. It is AI. And how
Yes.
they're using it. It's not just social media, it's how AI is also permeating basically everything.
We do understand that social media creates this, let's say, silos of realities for not only adults, but also for our students that are, or students, let's say, when I say students, I'm talking about these young consumer of this very specific content, right? So we do understand that their realities are within these silos, but I want that they silos at least have windows.
I hope so. Yes, absolutely.
I always tell them, listen, I understand that your reality is very different from the one that I grew up in, and it's very different from the one that I am living in, even if I am a user of the same social media. But I really do hope that your silo got windows.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyways, so what happens when learning becomes highly personalized and contextual for a student? Because basically what you and I have been discussing for the last 5 minutes is, okay, my student make a choice and they decided just to move on, continue, move forward. So this apparently as a question looks something somewhat positive, but is it really entirely?
I think personally, as a learner myself, because I continue to study it, when I think that personalized learning can be incredibly powerful because students get instant support and feedback. And when I was completing one of my MAs in digital technologies for language teaching, feed forward was a concept, not feedback, but feed forward was a concept that really stuck to my mind, because immediate feedback is what is usually missing. You take everything home, you mark it, you have 10 classes. By the time you give feedback 1 or 2 weeks later, students don't even remember what they had for breakfast. Imagine what they wrote 2 weeks before. So I think that the possibility of having AI giving immediate support and feedback is really useful. As a learner myself, I use AI every day to learn, to continue to learn, to get ideas when I'm stuck, when I can understand things. So I think that it is really useful when we can personalize it. But if everything becomes too easy, and I think this is where the issue lies, because it is very easy for a student to get us immediate support and feedback and an answer, I think they just want the answer. They don't want to go through the support. They don't want to go through reading and understanding the feedback. They want to get, most of them want to get to the shortcut. And I think that process that is missing in the middle is basically where they lose the struggle that actually builds learning. Because research says that if it is easy, we're not learning, because it's only when we hit that wall of learning when we struggle is when we're struggling to make those connections between things, is when we are creating those connections in the synapses that will help us retain and remember things for a longer period of time, writing things so that we can use muscular memory there as well to help encode that information. So I think that we need to design both for support and challenge. But as you said before, it's a matter of educating the students. They're not going to do it alone, because not everyone, obviously we cannot generalize and say all the students are doing the same, but most of them are probably just going for the shortcut, getting the answer so that they can focus on the things that they actually enjoy, want to enjoy right there and then. So I think that it is a matter of designing support and challenge, so that, but in a way that we raise the level of AI literacy, that we educate the students.
So let's focus then on the critical layer, which is learning and convenience. So there is definitely basically what you're saying, that there is a concern that AI can reduce effort or lead to cognitive offload. So when do you see that risk becoming real? Not just because it was this very specific choice, your student that had her volleyball match and she just had to run, but when it's part of their systematic set of choices, their everyday life kind of reality. When do you see that risk becoming real?
I'm a little bit of a pessimist in that sense, because I think I've seen it with some students preparing. For example, I do Cambridge B2 exam preparation, where they have to learn how to write essays and they have produced work. And a couple of years ago, I had a group of 3 students actually producing C2 level perfect essays, handwritten. And there was some typics, right? A correction tape over bits. And so I know this is perfect. If you could produce written English like this, it is highly likely that you can speak like this, and you cannot do that. And your previous work was not like that. So I confronted them and I said, so what did you use? Technology? Do you use the internet, AI? What do you use to write these 3 essays? Because they're perfect. No, we didn't. I said, are you 100% sure? Because I'm your teacher. I know you don't know this kind of language, these phrases. This is really complex. There's a wide range of grammar and vocabulary that is not typical of B2. No, we was asking, and I said, okay, great, no problem. So next lesson, you're going to rewrite it in front of me during the lesson. And if you produce the same quality, then fine, perfect. So they said, fine, no problem. But I noticed that they were like, oh no, now we're... So I called the parents and I explained to them and I said, listen, this is the situation. This is what I'm going to do. And they were all on board. They said, yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for informing us, which I think is important, because this is part of this ecosystem where AI integration is not the teacher, is not the student, is all the stakeholders, the institution, the parents, the students, the teacher. Anyway, so we did it. The results were clearly really bad. So I told them and I said, one last time, do you want to own up? And that's a new expression for you at B2. Do you want to, this is clear and not your, well, yes, we used a tool and but it was just to get ideas. And I said, are you 100%? Because I think you're keep digging deeper into this. And they said, well, yes, we use it. And I said, okay, I've spoken to your parents. For this term, your grade for writing is 0, because you were given the possibility to come clean. You were given the possibility to say, yes, we actually did, but you wanted to continue with it all the way to the end, and there was no way out of it. So please be warned that this is, in a school setting, maybe the only consequence is a 0, but in real life, you could get into jail, or you could get into real trouble because this is plagiarism. This is not you, and I know that. So after that experience, what I do is I tell them, I think it's important, build that AI literacy by saying, okay, so we're going to have a system where we have red, amber, and green. Red means you cannot use AI, and you must add at the end of your essay an AI statement. I confirm I have not used AI for this assignment. Amber, you can use it, but you need to add an AI statement where you say what you used it for, so that I can see what's your language and what is AI, because the whole point of you being in this classroom is for you to learn English, and I can there's no point in me evaluating AI's perfect output. And then green, you can use it for, and then give parameters. You can use it for brainstorming. You can use it for correcting basically the grammar and spelling and punctuation. But I think that we need that clarity, and that's also linked to redefining assessment, because then when they produce that, now part of the assessment is actually asking them about that after I read it. If they have no clue, it's a very clear sign that they probably just copied and pasted, even if they added an AI statement.
Yeah.
So I would make at least write one or two very specific questions about the content. If they went through the mental process, they are likely to remember it.
Yeah, and I would like to point out specifically, more than just only the learning and teaching example that you are sharing here with us today, is the fact that we have been in a system that is like a policing system for so long, where what it's important is the final result. Did I get an A? Did I get a B? That is what we are aiming. And I do understand it, and I am not totally against that, but how is it that you got that A or A plus? How is it that you got that B is where we need to focus nowadays. And that's what I am taking with this section of the conversation, to really try to make our students understand that whenever it is that you are giving them the chance to come clean, it's not really because there are like this horrible consequences and you're going on detention and your parent. No, it's not like that really. It's about understanding the moral choices and ethical choices and responsible choices behind the utilization of artificial intelligence, because you and I, as AI in education specialists, we do understand the dangers behind, not even to mention that if we were, for example, even more like not only for the humanities aspect, but also the deep technical aspects of artificial intelligence, as we knew even more, for example, in computing or technical engineers' point of view, we do know all the dangers behind. And our parents and students, they need to get on board knowing what is it that is going to happen with their choices. It's not just because you're getting an A or you're getting a B. It's because what happens if you do it in other different contexts and layers of your life now as an individual, but then as an individual in an adult's life. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah. And focus more on the process rather than the product.
All right. So at what point does support becomes dependency? Because we do know that, okay, we do understand that now our students are struggling between the choices. They are actually creating different ways to go around, like, how do I make my teacher, I'm going to use this tool or a variety of tools, but how is it that I'm going to make my teacher see that or prove I didn't use AI or not entirely? So they're being very creative about that rather than being creative on the learning aspect. So at what point does this AI support becomes dependency?
I think that just as with, myself, how I use it, I think when you can't move forward without it, that's when I think is like, oh, no, this is not positive. This is not good. So it's happened to me a couple of times that I go straight into it. It's okay, give me this, give me that, or do this. And it's no, wait, let me start with my own thinking. Think about my context and then give that context. This is what's happening. This is what I need. This is what I think I should do. I'm not 100% sure about A, B, and C. Please suggest 3 more options and tell me where the gap is, because maybe I can't see the gap, but at least I'm starting with my thinking. I think that is something that, especially at the beginning, I struggled with. It was more like, okay, yes, let's just ask. Let's see. There was a conversation, but I think it's more important if we should start with ourselves, with our own thinking, with our own doubts. And something I love about AI is that I don't feel judged. I feel free to say, listen, this is what I understand. I'm not 100% sure. I think I'm missing something. Please provide me with the rationale. Give me the rationale for this. If there are any gaps and where I could perfect my ideas. And I have these 3 ideas. And it becomes a learning point, because very often I see it's a great way of consolidating that learning. I think that learners are missing all of that because they're using it just to get answers or just without looking at the process and started immediately with give me an answer. This is the question, what's the answer? So I think that when they can move forward from that, and we can see that in class, when you ask a question and they're like, oh, I don't know. So imagine when they're trying to complete homework like that. So if they're stuck without AI, then we've gone too far. So as you said before, I think it's really important that we focus more on let's educate them. So you can use it, but don't use it to get the answer. Start with your own ideas, with your own doubts, with your own thoughts. Put them down in paper, make notes, then use those notes to ask, because at least you will have started with your own ideas, and AI is going to really help you understand where the gaps are. So for me, it's literacy in the classroom and outside the classroom for teachers, for students, and for all of us, because the risk is real. And I've experienced it myself, especially at the beginning. Wait a minute, why was that? I can't remember because I just got the answer. So start with yourself, with your own questions and doubts. And I think that's a way we can support or avoid, I guess a lot of people are now dependent on it, but then a more useful way of trying to win them off from being dependent with AI.
Yeah, I love this part because it's like confession moment. It's kind of like, I'm also guilty of charge. Yeah. Because one of the things that, since we're being super open about it, that I have been struggling with, especially with this part, and as an educator, that we have the structures, we know how is it that the learning process happens and all that, it happens to us. So I can only imagine what is going on with our students, that perhaps they have less mature developments when it comes to the learning process, or just even understanding who they are as learners and individuals. So it is extremely hard. I know that a lot of people online go out there and talk about this, specifically when they talk about critical thinking and analytical thinking in a very lighthearted way, when this is actually something that we should have more conversations about it. And not just because of the students, because we always talk about the students as if the educator is not going through similar situations. So let's talk about behind the scenes, right? Like what the teachers are actually building or experimenting. So since we have to reevaluate how we assess, how we create the activities in the classroom, specifically for each one of our subjects that we teach, whether it is in high school or higher education, what does the real design work behind AI supported learning actually involve?
Something that really comes to mind, I don't know, people, if listeners may remember Ruben Fuentedura's SAMR model, the SAMR framework, which is SAMR stands for substitution, A for augmentation, M for modification, R for redefinition. And so there's also TPAC, but SAMR comes to mind specifically because I'm constantly using it when thinking, do I really want to use this tool? Do I want to use? So if the AI tool that I'm using only substitutes the pen and paper, then it's not really doing much. So I'm just going to go the old way, use pen and paper, which is going to be as useful as anything else, rather than going through all the bells and whistles of an AI tool or activity. And I think that's what happened. I don't know, with the same thing happened with IWBs in the mid-2000s. Everyone was like, oh, there's IWBs and look at all the things you can do, when the focus was on the IWB. And okay, what about the students? How is the IWB, how is the AI tool really enhancing that learner? So for me, it's very clear that it is about designing how AI fits into the task. If it only substitutes it and I can use a pen and piece of paper and a pen, then it's probably not worth it. If it is redefining how we do it, then it's definitely useful. And I'll give you a practical example. With essay writing, if you have a clear system for students, red, amber, green, that I mentioned before, it's actually wonderful because they know you're going to ask them about it, right? So we're leading them. Yes, you can write a wonderful essay, you can use AI, you need the AI statement, but I'm going to ask you about it. So you're going to have to tell me, I'm going to explore your ideas. So they need to, something shifts, I think, because they go, okay, I'm going to have to do it. And I can say positively that it works, because most of the students that I've done that with, you can tell that they actually did it. They did use AI, the older ones, 16 plus, and this is very important because age of consent here in Spain is 14. And when they use it and they add the statement and you ask the questions, you can tell that they actually did it because of the things they say. You can actually see the thought process going in there. Did they use it? Great. But the most important thing is they use it correctly. So if it is just substituting, ignore it. That's what I do. If it is really actually helping to augment or modify or redefine, ideally, redefine that task, then that's what I'm going to do. And I think that's what we should be doing. When is it when it's used, when it's not, and what students do with the output, I think is important. But if we don't set the parameters and guide them, because they need guidance, then it's going to end up being a cat and mouse situation.
Yes.
Catch the mouse. And I think that we all know as teenagers, the more we are told don't do that, the more we're going to do it. It's less about the tools and more about the learning design.
So what I am keeping from this section of the conversation is that I love that you are implementing correct, proper use of artificial intelligence, because we do know that is their reality, their current reality. Hopefully more educators.
We have to get to speak their language, right? I remember 20 years ago, we need to get to know them so we can speak their language so that they understand this is their language now.
Yeah. But then, of course, since we're talking about the struggles of the educator in the classroom, what teachers most struggling, what is it that you think teachers are struggling most with right now when they are trying to integrate AI into their practice?
In my experience as a teacher and seeing my peers and as a teacher educator, what I think I see two main things. One is clarity. So that lack of AI literacy, understanding the basics, rather than it's just a tool, let's just use it for the sake of using it. The second one is time, because the regular teacher has probably 4, 5, or 6 lessons a day, and they have to follow a syllabus, they have to follow a program, they need to get their students from A to D by the end of the school year. So when do you actually bring it in during preparation? When are they going to do that? So I think that clarity on good AI's use actually is one of the things, awareness of ethical and responsible use. So that AI tool looks wonderful. I'm just going to use it. Okay, once before you actually do, check the age of consent, check the tool. Is it GDPR compliant for all those of us in Europe or anywhere where they're using GDPR as a point of reference, or in the US like COPPA or FERPA? So I think even before that, make sure that we understand the tool and that we can actually use it so that we don't put ourselves and our institution and our students at risk. So understanding age of consent, actual use and deployment outside the classroom. I think that's what teachers are struggling with. And then the time to redesign tasks properly. They have this thing, okay, I want to jazz up the course book. Do I have the time to actually do it? If I don't know the tool very well, that's the risk. Oh, I want to use it. And then they end up using it for the sake of it, because it's something different without actually thinking it through. So 2 things, I think clarity and then time would be the 2 things that I personally have struggled and continue to struggle to try and find that balance, that fine balance when adopting AI.
Now, by the end of 2023, since ChatGPT appeared, most AI, let's say early adopters, like, for example, yourself, myself, that were not in the context of artificial intelligence, let's be very clear, because I don't come from a tech background. Do you?
No.
There
I
you
mean,
go.
I did the earliest thing was 2009 when I did the cert ICT, teaching languages with technology. And then one thing linked to the MA in technology, but not an engineering or anything like that.
Exactly. To quote Bell Hooks in her book, Critical Thinking, it's more like for us, the joy of learning and discovering things
That's right.
that like drove us crazy mad, like, I need to learn about this thing, right?
Yeah.
So, but we know that we have invested a lot of not only time, but also different resources when it comes to our own learning. So
Mm.
let's talk about the responsibilities and the system problems, like what happens within ecosystems, because it is understandable that, for instance, when we're talking about early days, which is what you and I experimented like in 2020 until now, fast forwarding, it's been 3 years now, right? So a
So
lot
much
have,
has changed.
yes, and a lot has happened in between. So what does fragmented AI use in schools actually look like in practice? Because the example that you were talking about before, it looks like that educator had to make a lot of independent decisions. But I believe that it doesn't have to look like that, or at least
Mm.
not anymore. So what are your thoughts about this specific?
I think that there's a huge problem because I think that most institutions, they're not really thinking about it. And
Mhm.
so what happens then is just down to whoever is enthusiastic like you and me. And enthusiasm is not good enough because you can be making lots of mistakes through being enthusiastic without going through the process of learning. For example, I discovered for me I haven't finished it, but doing the Skill in Future AI Integration Fellowship that I'm still on in the process was such an eye-opener on many fronts. And this fragmented AI use means that lots of institutions, from what I can see in my different roles as a teacher educator, but also as an inspector for different boards, is that very few institutions are actually doing it as an institution. And that means from including management, teaching staff, parents, students, and the community. It's mostly, in my experience, I would say 95%, if not more, is just down to that very enthusiastic teacher who's experimenting and wants to make a change and wants to use it to enhance their students' learning and probably their own learning. So you can people allowed to use it in one class, banned in another, ignored in the third. I think that in this way, nobody's really building skills that are needed. It's just shooting in the dark to see what happens, and they just adapt to each situation. And I think that's a big problem.
So, what needs to be in place for a school to move from experimentation to actual proper AI practice and structure?
In my experience and where I work, what we did, we started 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago with, okay, there is a problem. So
Mhm.
let's start with at least a policy and at least something, an AI use policy for our teachers. Obviously, we could do more, but I guess clear guidelines are necessary so that all teachers, all staff, not only teachers, because other people may be using it at other levels in the school, in the company, whether it's a school or a company. So clear guidelines, definitely teacher training that is not just a one-off CPD session on AI literacy, but more a course where the basics, the foundation is laid down, and some rethinking of assessment. I think that at least those three things are necessary, but not coming from the individual teacher. This should be part of the institution as a whole, as an institutions are organic. It's a living organism. You have the education department, you have admin, you have exams, you have marketing. So it should be at 360 degrees. It shouldn't be just left in the hands of teachers who may be doing a great job, being very meticulous, very thorough, studying about it, like finding out before using. I think it should be everyone involved, and otherwise it just stays at the level of experimentation with the risks that brings about. I may be using, for example, a tool that is GDPR is 14, but the tool says the minimum age of consent is 18. I have 14 years old and I give them homework. Yes, go and create an account and then use it to do this, and we're going to explore it in class.
Yeah.
Best of intentions on my part, but the law admits no ignorance. And therefore, I could be liable for breaching GDPR with fines. I read somewhere fines of like a fine of 4 million euro. I put the institution at risk, and then it's just not the way it should be done. So that's definitely a problem.
Yeah. And again, it's a problem because we systematically continue making it a problem instead of actually, because what I see about this is that there are a lot of patches. We're very creative at, coming up with patches. Let's patch this, putting one hand and then the other hand was like, oh my God. And then everything falls apart. So
That's
we
right.
are like with AI, what I see, it's more or less like repetitively this scene over and over, just coming up with the patches. Then they can be good, they can work for the now, but they are patches nonetheless. So
That's right. Until they're not.
until they're not, that is
That's
for me,
right.
that is the biggest issue. What happens when that patch is not working well enough? Not anymore, because we have surpassed a situation, or there has been a situation that was, in terms of ethics, safety, and responsibility, that has surpassed that. So let's get into that specifically, since we have opened that box. So
That's right.
when working with younger learners, and when I say younger, is people that are in high school or K-12 in general, and higher education, when working with them, how do you approach access, safety, and responsible use in a sentence? Like, how would you do that?
Making thinking visible, asking those questions in the classroom. That's what I started doing about a year and a half ago. How are you using AI? What tools are you using and taking notes? And do you know the age of consent? Do you know that? Can you actually do that? Or I'm using my parents' XYZ tools account. Just, you shouldn't be doing that, right? And helping them understand. Students, even younger students, they are intelligent beings, right? I think that very often people say, oh, they don't understand that. They do understand it very well. So I think the focus should be on habits, making it a constant conversation. It is that culture of honesty, transparency in the classroom. I tell my students, when I create a handout or an interactive worksheet, I tell them I use AI, how I used it, and then I ask them, why do you think I use that one instead of a piece of paper? They're still using English, right? But I want them to start thinking critically. So is it useful? Is it not? Is it the same? Oh, it's the same. Maybe we could use paper. Why? Tell me why. Convince me. So I think the focus should be on habits, not just on the tools, and also questioning outputs. Why do you think that's the answer? Why are you using it? How is it different to actually just doing it in pen and paper? Understanding bias and being transparent about using AI. So I think it's habits, not tools, making that people, as you said before, people talk about critical thinking. Yeah, but what does it look like? Is actually taking those 5 minutes in class. I had someone saying, oh, but that's a waste of time. They don't teach us to teach that. We're English teachers. They're speaking, they're using English. We're helping them become critical because it's just not English. We're educators. It's true, we're using English as a medium, but we're educating them. Just not just AI. When they just hit someone, we're teaching them boundaries. Why? How do you think the other person feel? How would you feel if someone else hit you? Is that right or wrong? Why? Let's talk about it in English. So I think it's making that, bringing that conversation into the classroom. I think that's not happening, and that's what we're missing, an opportunity to raise their awareness of what a good AI use looks like.
Yeah. I just simply want to add to this a reflection that you have just made, that the amount of responsibility that the user has, because a lot of people believe that they don't have, because they're a minor, for example, or because they are just the user, they don't really have this responsibility when they choose to do certain things with AI, like, for example, creating nude pictures. Even if they are badly done, it is something that you are infringing a huge amount of laws there, not to mention the moral and ethical choices. So there are things that, of course, it might look like a prank initially, but then what happens next, right? So I would like also to add, just to your reflection about the responsibility the user also have to have. To close, what do you hope students still develop as human learners in an AI-supported world?
Always coming from my own experience, I see myself as a learner before I see myself as a teacher. That's why I continue to learn and to study, because I think I owe it to my students to be current. So I hope that they can be inspired the way I'm inspired when I'm learning. And I hope that they get excited the way I get excited when I'm revising something. And go, oh, yes, I remember that now. And it's okay, but how is that connected? I think it is connected this way. So I hope that in the classroom with my students, that I'm able to inspire them to enjoy learning in a responsible way. And that's why that critical thinking needs to go beyond the critical thinking slogan. It needs to become real. I hope that they can see and they become real thinkers through those habits of asking those questions over and over again. And I have a couple of students who have said, oh, but you ask the same questions all the time. And I said, yeah, but are the answers always the same? And they go, no. There you go, because you force them to think about things. So I hope that they become independent, real critical thinkers, not just the critical thinking, but that it means something to them through those questions. Why is that? How is it different? What happens if I don't use it or if I use it? And the ability to communicate clearly. And I think that's something that happens only when we ask those questions that are unscripted, that are not in the course book, and that make learning in the classroom real. And so I would like to just finish with something that I always say and repeat, and it is AI supports learning, but we teachers inspire it. We teachers inspire it.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for today's conversation. Everyone, if you want to keep on learning and following Robert, you can find him on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook in his dedicated channels, Learning Together with Robert. If you want to follow him on LinkedIn, you can follow him by his full name, Robert Martinez. And of course, if you want to continue supporting us, Skilling Futures podcast, I invite you to do so, because this is a space for educators and the rest of the ecosystem in education. So come keep on listening to us. We want you to live the experience of teaching and learning through real educators out there and their experience. So thank you for being here today with us, Robert, and thank you guys for listening to us. See you the next time.
Thank you so much. It was really great talking about these things.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.